Justin Lum recently sat down with Keith Taniguchi, the attorney who represented Joseph Ryan in his custody battle with Lori Vallow. Now, there's a lot of things that came out during this conversation that I felt like shed light on that situation and more insight into Lori and what she's capable of. One thing that was overall interesting was hearing from someone inside a different part of this case. His vantage point is especially interesting to me because he was on the opposing end of what Lori was after. Now, Keith jumps right into the situation, and he's saying, look, you know what, this really began as a criminal case, and what he's talking about were those allegations against Joseph Ryan. Now, the allegations were those that Joseph Ryan was abusing Tylee. And again, he mentions during this how young Tylee was. You know, this is like under the age of 4. So she was at a very young age during this time. Now, Keith goes into some of the details as to how they were doing this investigation, trying to get Joseph. And he says, you know what, they surprised him at one point, and they just stopped into his place and they confiscated his bed. And what they were hoping to do was do some DNA tests on it. Obviously hoping to find like Tylee and his DNA on the top of it. And they did this and nothing came of it. He talks about, you know, polygraph tests that Joseph Ryan took and passed. He also goes into how Tylee was, you know, seeing this same story. Remember, she's extremely young here. And she's saying all this stuff. She's seen a counselor, and that one day she basically just recants this information. Now, the case did end up going to jury trial, and he was found not guilty. Now, I do think another thing that's interesting is how Keith says, you know what, Joe really, really loved Tylee. I mean, this was his daughter. He adored her. You know, he would never do this to her, number one. And number two, you know, he was like, look, he gave Lori the benefit of the doubt. You know what I mean? He was like, that's her mother. No one would ever suspect, no matter how maybe evil someone seems or whatever, that someone would end up doing what she did to Tylee, you know, to their own child. But Keith does say, you know, over time, obviously stuff started clicking into place. You know, and he cited one example about how Tylee wasn't doing very well health-wise, and all Lori was feeding her was processed foods, you know, just kind of filling her up with garbage. And I guess her lack of concern over her well-being just on that basic level made him even more concerned about the situation. Now, Keith also talks about the money situation. You know, at one point, Joseph Ryan was doing very well. You know, he actually ended up overpaying, I think, by like $9,000. Now, Keith brings up the fact that then all of a sudden Lori ups and moves to Arizona. Now, clearly, this puts a huge financial burden on Joseph to try and see Tylee when it comes to visiting and things of that nature. And Keith says, you know what, we took it to court because we felt like she was doing this intentionally to keep him away from her, but they couldn't prove that. Now, another point of interest is he's talking about, you know, how Lori came off as like this perfect mother, how she was able to create this facade on the outside. We've seen this with all these people that know her, with April, with Melanie, all these other people that are like, she was this picture perfect mother. She was what everyone wanted to be when it came to being a mother. And so I think that's interesting that even this attorney was seeing this. Now, he even mentions that at one point, when all this was going on with Tylee's situation, and Lori was moving, that they had a guardian ad litem who went from Texas to Arizona to, you know, do a home inspection, things like that. And this person came back and was just like, look, I mean, this is like a near perfect mother. They have a nice house, they have a pool, she seems wonderful, there's a good interaction, yada, yada, yada. So it seems like Lori has mastered this, who knows, maybe her whole life. One thing that Keith does say is he's like, you know what, when it comes to men, Lori has a currency, and that is her outward appearance and sex. This is what she's able to do to get what she wants. So there's that. I find that part very interesting. Now, he also talks about how difficult it was for Joseph going to Arizona to try and even get up with these visits for Tylee. And he says, you know what, there's a list of police reports to show this, where, you know, basically Lori was playing all these games and weaponizing the police. Now, Keith does talk about the more he got to know Lori and seeing, you know, up close behavior, that he felt like she started exhibiting some really bizarre stuff. And he does go into the aspect of, yeah, you know, she was a Mormon, but some of this stuff was like out there, you know, stuff he had never heard of. But he says that he felt like there was something else motivating this, some ulterior motive. And again, I think we see that with most of her interactions when she's after something or a goal. He even claims that the second person in charge of the Mormon church contacted him to vouch for Lori. Take that with a grain of salt. So let's talk about that taser stun gun attack. Now, because of those allegations with Tylee, even once Joseph was getting visitation rights, all that kind of stuff, they were supervised. So on one of the first, in fact, the first visit that he goes to see Tylee in Arizona, this incident occurs. Now, Keith says that it's been like over a year since he saw Tylee at this point. He says that once he's leaving, going out to his car, that is when Alex surprises him and does this attack. Now, Keith says, look, there's no way that Alex would have known about the location of this, where anything was going on, unless Lori had told him. Again, we see this all the time with Lori's behavior, especially with Alex. I mean, look at what happened to Charles Vallow. Now, also, no big shocker, Lori's saying, I don't know how he found out about this. I don't know what was going on. And Keith even says that Alex was at Lori's house the night before. Now, thankfully, Alex did get convicted of aggravated assault on that and did some time over it. Now, also, yet another sad aspect of this whole case is when Keith goes into the details of talking to Joe for one of the last times. Now, Keith said that Joe called him and was essentially like, look, I'm not going to have a place to stay, and asked his attorney, can I come stay with you for a bit? And Keith was like, look, you know what? I'm obviously want to help someone out. He thinks that Joe's a great guy, but at the end of the day, he's like, you're also not my kid, so, just, make it quick. So Keith said that Joe stayed with him for a few months, and it was during this time that he realized that, Joe had developed a drinking problem. Now, he said that he had not seen this kind of behavior in Joe before when they were working, so to me, it really shows that trajectory, like how much Lori had worn this man down. Keith also said that his own brother let Joseph come and stay with him for a while as well. And Keith also said, at one point I thought that Joseph had gone back to New York, and he's like, I guess he did, but then he went back to Arizona, and then the next thing he's hearing is that, Joseph, that's when he passed away. Now, Keith also says, when asked about the whole situation of like, do you think Lori did away with him, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, look, if she didn't have some kind of direct way of doing this, he's like, that stun gun, the taser incident, he's like, that really set Joseph back. He was like, he was in the hospital for a few days over that. Keith really made it sound like to me that it was like, look, if nothing else, that attack on him from Alex really set his heart back. So, if all this other stuff was going on with his body, that wasn't helping it and kind of created the canvas for heart problems to come. Now, he also said, look, Joe was clearly depressed. I mean, he mentions the drinking thing. And then just all the evidence that shows of what Lori put this man through. I mean, she destroyed his life. Now, when Justin's asking him, are you surprised about these recordings that we've heard of Lori addressing this room and saying, what she wanted to do to Joseph? And he's like, no, not at all. Not at all. This is not surprising to hear from her. And he compares Lori, which I thought was very interesting, to an organized crime boss, where he was like, what? Lori doesn't have to put her hands on the actual crime. She is able to manipulate others around her, especially men, with her currency, with her sexuality, with her looks, yada, 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 to get these things done. So he said, just like these big mafia crime bosses, where a lot of times they're not the ones actually doing these crimes. They're not pulling the trigger. They're not doing the hits. He says Lori is capable of this. Now, another thing that I thought was a great question asked by Justin Lum was, he said, look, when you're seeing Lori on TV and you're seeing all this stuff going on with her demeanor, her general way of just maneuvering with people and in situations, how does that compare? And the attorney just keeps circling back, where he's like, what? She's just manipulating, and she's just manipulating men. She's using that sexuality. That's what she does, and that's what she seems to be doing, with attorneys, with this, with that. So I thought that was really interesting insight, because, we've kind of seen this. Let's be honest with Chad Daybell. It probably didn't take much twisting of his arm to do a lot of things by her. Now, Justin also asked, to kind of finish it up, like, look, this custody battle, where does it rank as far as, like, all your cases go and whatnot? And Keith says the top 3, if not the top 1, as far as just salacious, evil, that kind of stuff. So I thought this was an excellent interview by Justin Lum. His social media is in the description below. If you're not already following him, if you follow this case, definitely check it out. Hearing this interview with Keith, and then also putting it in context of what we've seen coming out of Lori, coming out of this case, as well as that recent audio of her that was released, it's just more insight into how she works, into how she manipulates, and into how this entire case came to be, and what she was doing, not doing, and manipulating to have done to create the chaos that we see that surrounds her and destroys lives around her. Now, if you want to see the rest of my commentary on this case, just click some of the videos that are popping up. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.